Welcome, Irene.
Thank you, Prof. Good morning, everyone. So my presentation will look at the SickleInAfrica data harmonization. So the SickleInAfrica consortium developed their own data harmonization model, and I'm going to briefly look at that. So a brief background. Advancements in clinical data management systems have led to the availability of large-scale phenotype and clinical data sets with multiple variables from different locations. Such data sets need to be harmonized prior to integration for potential analysis and inferences. So most of the existing guidelines currently for standardization and harmonization rely heavily on manual tasks. However, automated data harmonization should help minimize manual interference, errors, and possibly enhance data quality. In natural language processing, graph and semantic similarity-based algorithms have been suggested for word sense disambiguation. So the SickleInAfrica data harmonization model, the model that was developed by the database working group with Prof. Gaston, the late Prof. Gaston, is the model that is being used currently to harmonize the SparkleSites datasets. So the model uses ontology search matching coupled with natural language-based word graph similarity information retrieval for automatic data harmonization and integration. It is important to note that this model has two main systematic processes, and that is the human to machine and the machine to human processes. So the human to machine process, here the data element mapping is done without human or manual interference. And when it comes to the machine to human process, this consists essentially of a manual curation process, mainly in cases where more than one matching variable is identified, thus requiring domain expert judgment. In this case, all candidate matches are sorted based on similarity scores, so the main expert can quickly decide on a more appropriate match. This process was the similarity scores matching, and the sorting was done by the database working group in the SickleInAfrica for the sake of, in the case of the SickleInAfrica harmonization process. So the SickleInAfrica data harmonization model, the main aim of the model is to speed up phenotype and clinical research data pooling, that is data harmonization and integration, using an automatic process where mapping given data elements that are set to a standardized data element set built from targeted sets. This is the workflow of the model. If you look closely, you'll see that, so on your right, so if you follow the red arrow going down, it's just an indication of how the workflow process is followed through when you're working through this model. So there is a repository in GitHub where you can find the Python code for the model and a further explanation on how this model process is done. So we start with combining all data element sets from different sites and then retrieve data elements exactly mapped or matched using ontologies. So the ontology mapping process, I think Jay did talk about that yesterday. So the ontology, the SCDO, is used to standardize the data elements, and in standardizing the data elements, then you're able to do a matching or mapping of the data elements that is from the different sites. And then the other part is the word graph. So the word graph is where you're using the natural language process, the word segmentation, and word sense similarity, disambiguation. And then once the different data sets have been matched or similarity-based mapped elements have come together, then they're all harmonized and put in the standardized codebook. So a quick look at the word graph similarity matching process. So in that graph, this is the graph. This we will be referring to, the one that uses the NLP process. So the graph nodes correspond to words, and an edge between two nodes represents word co-occurrence. The word sense disambiguation for unmatched words is performed using the word graph, in which stem word sequences are paths representing possible interpretations of the word sequence to be disambiguated. And the distance between two words is defined using the adjacency matrix of the word graph constructed to represent word co-occurrence. So from this distance, a semantic similarity model is derived using a linear transformation. The semantic similarity score between sequence words is computed using best match average and words with high similarity scores, meeting the threshold for mapped to threshold are mapped to the word for which word sense disambiguation is applied. And then this model was essentially validated using the Sparkle sites datasets, that is the datasets from Ghana, Nigeria, and Tanzania. The three sites dictionaries, so the data elements from the three different sites were harmonized. And so on this slide, what I have is a sneak peek of what you find on the GitHub repository. This is the link to the GitHub repository. And we are having a manuscript that will be out soon. That gives detailed information of the data harmonization model, the SickleInAfrica, specifically the SickleInAfrica data harmonization model. And on this slide, I have the result from the data harmonization process. So this is just one of those results. So these are the number of data elements per site that have been harmonized using the SickleInAfrica data harmonization model. Prof will give a bit more information about this data harmonization model and processes within the consortium. And we aim to have the fairness, so the data harmonization aims to make sure the fairness principle is kept. That is, we have the stable identifiers, the metadata curation can be found somewhere, and the metadata is accessible, links to full data or access information with authentication and interoperability, matching to ontologies, links to public data sources, and reusable license information, provenience, reproducibility. So we aim to have all this within our SickleInAfrica database, and through the data harmonization process, we hope to be able to keep our data in a much reproducible and shareable way. Thank you.
So thank you, Irene, for that. And just to echo on what Irene has just presented, I hope you are able to see the PowerPoint. Sorry, I have to share again. So Irene has said very well why data harmonization is required. So if we all know why we are coming to this SickleInAfrica consortium, the main purpose is to share not only the clinical experiences, but also to pull the data that we can use for different analysis and for coming up with very powerful conclusions. So for statisticians, they will know that for a study to be powered, you need to have a certain number of sample population that you require to do this. So we come in the collaboration for us to be able to pull data together and come up with a very strong and powerful analysis. And that's why many people are coming to different consortiums and be able to do these analysis together. So this, I must acknowledge, came from Gaston's, the late Dr. Gaston's presentation, who was very keen on this concept of harmonization. What will happen is that different sites will generate different data sets. So depending on how many sites, for example, initially we had 3 sites, and now we're expanding to 6 sites, and maybe we'll have more sites later. So you come up with data from one site and that from the other side, but this data, the idea is you want to combine it and perform meta-analysis. And you really want to have very, very, very strong results if you pull up this data. Now, the problem that may arise, and which we have already seen, is where we have inconsistency in the way the data elements are presented, but also on the data specification. What I mean here is variables can be named differently for the same attribute of a patient, for example, where actually they mean the same thing. So for the person who is doing the analysis, they may have problem to acknowledge what type of data they are dealing with. So this is one problem, but the other problem is how you categorize the data. For example, let's take a simple attribute, gender. So one site can code that attribute as 0 being male and 1 being female, but the other one can label, for example, 1 as male and 2 as female. So if you pull that data without clear description, if you just combine that data from different sites, you will have issues, definitely, because that one, which means female in one place, it means male in another site. And the idea of harmonization is to avoid such problems in order to allow that you can perform this analysis in the end. So again, this is from Gaston, late Gaston, and he explained at which step you can do this harmonization. So you want to do it at the beginning, which is a prospective analysis, and you keep adjusting as you go, or do you want to do it retrospective, where you really don't care about when you are doing the harmonization? At the end, before you do the analysis, you can harmonize the data elements, given the fact that you have access to the data dictionary and data code books. So that's up to people to decide how to do. But as Irene has said before, we noticed, for example, that in the data elements that we have shared in what we call the SickleInAfrica data elements, if you look at different sites, what is the usage of these data elements? You see that the usage is only a small proportion of the data elements that we have, and there are other either very unique elements which are site-specific, or some elements which are also part of they have the same definition as the ones in the SickleInAfrica, but they are named differently and used differently. So the idea of harmonization is now to try to bring these other elements, either to cope with the one from the Sickle in Africa, or to make sure that these other elements can also become part of the Sickle in Africa, so that all other people, if they want, they can use those elements. So when we said one of the meetings before, we decided that we need to harmonize this situation and make sure that the elements are consistent across. So we developed the script that is able to do this. But this script required input from the users. It required input from the site because there was a mapping, as explained. I will not repeat this as been explained by Irene, but the site need to specify what is the mapping from the variable that we have within Sickle in Africa, what is the equivalent variable, and what are the type of codings that are given for that variable. So it became a little bit manual work. Even though we have a script to finally harmonize and change the data into a complete compatible Sickle in Africa format, it required a bit of intervention. So that's why the Stone went ahead and made this human-machine interaction algorithm, which can look at the data elements and can decide using the natural language processing that a particular element belongs to a certain category of the Sickle in Africa category. So, and I think Irene has pointed out to where this can be accessed. And what I want to insist from this is that we should, for example, with the new sites, start from the beginning to harmonize our data elements before we go on collecting a large amount of data. So we make sure we do, because it's a very cumbersome process to harmonize the data once you have huge amount of data, because you have to make sure that the data is consistent and it aligns with the master data dictionary. So it's important that we sit down with the new sites, but also with the existing sites, to make sure that this harmonization is done properly. And for the new sites, it's better that they make sure that their data dictionary is consistent from the word go. Then we avoid a lot of problems. So during our meetings, we can decide and plan schedule for doing these different type of processes to align our data dictionaries. So I just want to thank Irene for her presentation, and also this is all inspired by the great work that our colleague Gaston started working on, and we promise to keep doing this. So I want to thank everyone for listening.
Okay, thank you very much, Zangeda, for a wonderful presentation on how we are putting these data elements together. Vicky, your hand is up.
Yes, good morning. Thank you to Irene for the presentation and for the team who worked on the harmonization code. I was just interested in maybe a discussion around the common data elements that are going to be used by the consortium. I think this discussion was meant to happen yesterday, and as you could see from Irene's presentation, the data elements that Ghana shared were much less than the other sites. It was different number of data elements being shared by the sites. And I think, I'm not sure whether the consortium could come to a consensus on which data elements to share, and maybe share a little bit more, because I think you can ask stronger questions from just the registry if there are more common data elements shared across the sites. This is really just a question and a discussion on how we could motivate sites to collect or share more common data elements which are in the core SickleInAfrica data elements.
Any comments from the group?
Yes, so good morning, everyone. Good morning.
Good morning.
Okay, great.
Governor.
So, yeah, so with respect to the data elements to be shared, I think it's a function of the studies that are being done, or the function of the data that is being obtained from the patient. We still have that situation where patients are coming on their own to the clinics, right? And they are paying for services on their own. So I believe that if we want more robust data to be collected, then we should plan for it across board, so that all the elements that we want to put in the registry are actually factored in, and so that all the sites will be able to collect that. So I think that it takes extra planning, but being a registry, is the basics, demographics and all that we are getting, isn't it? So with that conversation, we'll still have to go on. If we're getting laboratory data, then that has to be factored in. But I believe that in the second phase, where we are going to plan actual research studies, that situation will not arise, because all of those will be factored in, and the data will be collected in a uniform manner using the protocols for the studies. Thank you.
Thank you, Prof.
Any other?
Obi, for the response. So I think a question, if I understand well, you're saying that maybe the research studies will inform which are the core data elements as well to be collected, so that it's uniform across sites. But I'm just wondering, for now, what will the consortium agree to? Because the research studies will take a while for us to decide on the data elements that are to be collected uniformly across, for the research. Just for the registry itself, which are the minimum sets? I think Tafadzo also has a comment. I'm not sure. I'll leave the moderators to, yeah. So I think for us as SADC, we would like direction from the consortium on the registry core data elements.
Great. So I think
while we wait for the research
if I may say something,
finalized.
Yes, those are great points. So when
thank you. That's about it for me.
Yeah. So when you put up that a histogram in which you have the data elements from Ghana, the ones from Nigeria, and the ones from Tanzania, I think Tanzania is leading the way in showing us what is possible. Because they have very few data elements. You understand? It's very, I think I'm seeing like 23 and 35. So they are leading the way. And maybe if we use them as benchmark across board, then everybody can contribute, those minimum, and it should be fine. Sorry, I didn't mean to be funny. I'm sorry.
No, we are fine. We are fine. Prof. Zangeda.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Chairman. So I can hear my echo. I don't know where it's coming from. But yes, the points that have been posed by Professor Nodu, I think are very relevant, and there are questions we have discussed for many times, a couple of times actually. So I think we need to define the minimum elements. This is very important. And also, it's not meant to say who complies more than the other. For example, I can tell you why Tanzania complied more. It's because I think they in the beginning, they kept only the elements that are required for the registry. Remember the first phase was mostly to do with the registry. So just to register the patient. So they had very minimal, and as such, those elements matched quite quickly with the basic elements that were defined by SADC. In contrast, people like Ghana, they already had, and I think this is also a question will be raised, they had all other mechanisms to continue follow-up studies and measure other parameters that Tanzania, for example, were not funded or maybe didn't have an ongoing study at that time that were able to collect such data. So what we are saying at this point is let the studies that we are doing define some of the elements that we are collecting. So, and as Professor Obi said, we need to apply this across the board. So what I see here is we need to have basic registry elements. We need to have the other research elements that fit across the board. And we may have elements that sites specifically want to do because they are enabled by other collaborations and the research to do them. We should allow that. But I think what we generally want to agree in the consortium is that we are developing a standardized database that we want to comply to. So whether that data will be shared or not, for example, Ghana maybe didn't share all their elements, they only shared some. But we think that at some point, we might have a research or finding that cuts across the board. At that time, we don't want to start the harmonization process again. So let our site try to look at the standard data elements and let their databases comply to that, so that at any moment that we want to share this data, then it will be compatible with everyone. So the mechanism of sharing data is a different discussion, Vicky. I don't know how we're going to put this. First, let us comply to the data elements, and then the sharing part, please let us continue to discuss how best to do this. As I said, if patients are paying for themselves, what do we do with the data? Those are still questions that we need to discuss, but I think we want as much as possible to be standardized. That's my call.
Okay, thank you very much, Prof. Zangeda. Before Catherine comes in, Jack has a question. The question is to Irene and Raphael. In cases where it's not possible to harmonize an element exactly, does the method include a way to estimate the bias of the harmonization? As we wait for that answer, Catherine, over to you. Your hand is raised.
Thank you very much, Chair. I would just like to add comments to what has been said by Professor Nudo and the previous speaker. I think it is important, this particular phase, it has been mentioned that we're going to be collecting more data elements because I think I believe we'll be following up these patients and therefore we'd even be collecting follow-up data. It's not just demographic data. We are also trying to improve the standards of care, which also include collecting data for these patients, which may not be done in some of the institutions that we're coming from. And therefore, I also wanted to find out, is this something that we can actually adopt so that even with the CRFs that we're going to be using, are these forms that we can actually use and put in our patients' files to help, also introduce data collection within our institution, especially if we're going to be collecting the data as we are. And talking about harmonization of data, in trying to do that, we may actually want to collect a bit more data than is being collected for research purposes. Or indeed, we may be collecting data from other studies, which we may also want to incorporate in the registry. Is that something that is doable? I think that was my question. And in doing that as well, maybe we can consider making some elements that have to be collected across the board and make provision for extra data to be collected by those that can. Thank you.
Okay, so question for Prof. Zangeda and Irene, if you can answer those two questions. And I think we'll move on to our next presentation after that, and we'll make time to have a more thorough discussion on that, if time permits, which I know it should. So Prof. Zangeda.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Chair. Definitely, there will be a bias where with an algorithm, we expect that some elements may not match. I don't know if we should call that a bias, but those can be expected because sites can have data that others don't have. But I think a clear bias will be where an element that matches another element is not clearly identified. And I think that is an inherent character of the natural language processing. I don't know if Irene want to say how that algorithm handles bias, but what I'm saying is there will be elements that will not match, there will be mismatch because of it's real, they don't match. And initially we said that without our SickleInAfrica data element set was quite comprehensive, but we cannot guarantee that we captured all the elements. So it's open for improvement. In the subsequent versions, we added the elements that are not matching to the general set. Irene, can you say something on the bias with the natural language processing?
Yes, like Prof says, there will be some data elements that don't match, and if the word sense disambiguation process is not able to resolve that, some of the data elements will definitely be unique to some of the sites, and that is acceptable. That's pretty much acceptable. Yeah, and the model is still open to improvement. It's not really exhaustive. So please log into the GitHub page, check out the code, try it out, and let us know.
Okay, thank you. Any comments about Katherine's question? If the basic elements are available to be added to patient notes so that it's not missed by any site?
Yes, we will. I think I will agree with Sadak that we have this basic set of elements, and we need to share this with the sites so that they comply from where to go. So I don't know, Vic, when we can share these elements. I think they were circulated before, but we can do it again.
Sure. So I think we would share it and then have further discussions on having the basic. Final comment to be from I second Vicky's suggestion if we can agree on the minimum data elements. Yeah, so yes, so that's what we are going to do. So I think the agreement is you agree on basic elements, base elements, then we would agree that all sites would at least collect those base elements so that we can all be on the same base, Thank you very much, Prof. Zangeda and team, for taking us through data elements harmonization.